Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are a small group, which is great, but our voice will be heard all around the country. Thanks to our hero here, Roland Borbert, who videos all this discussion and then showed it into about 20, 30 TV stations around the country. Okay. Tonight we are honored to have our speaker here. That you probably know, Patricia Perez Valdes. She will be, the talk is on honoring the victim of Pinochet years of Chile's Museum of Memory and Human Rights. This is an important museum in Santiago, Chile. Its mission is to allow dignity for the victims of Chile's military dictatorship under Pinochet and for their families, stimulating reflection and debate, and to promote respect and tolerance in order that these events never happen again. Had we had this museum 100 years earlier, the tragedy and atrocity that took place 1970 against the Armenian people, a subject that was fully discussed here last month by another scholar. Perhaps the tragedies that took place in 30s and 40s against Jews and other minorities would have not taken place. So hope we will have many more scholars like our speaker tonight and many more museums like the one in Chile to promote the tragedies and what causes to human dignity. Let me welcome Patricia Perez and her background. Patricia is currently in our area as a Global Fellow at Keene State College. The Holocaust and Genocide Studies academic program at Keene State, together with the Auschwitz Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, invites one person that has participated in the Institute for an entire semester of sharing with the college community. Patricia has received that honor this semester, and we are grateful to have her as our speaker this evening. Before I give the table and the microphone to Patricia, permit me to make 3 announcements that is important. One, our next talk. Are you okay? Our next speaker, our next talk will take place on Friday, November 30th at Center Congregational Church, and the speaker will be Ambassador Peter Galbraith, who will speak on the US versus Iran. Will a proxy fight in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen lead to war? Again, this is, as I mentioned, on Friday, November 30th in Center Congregational Church. And we are honored to have the pastor of the church with us tonight. You can say hello to him. Secondly, I would like to bring to your attention a local event of international interest that will take place this Sunday, October 21st, from 1 to 5 p.m. There will be a celebration of 100 years of Lithuanian independence at Camp Naringa. Thank you, Naringa. Cha-cha-cha. Which is located at 147 Naringa Road in Brattleboro. If you are interested in attending, there are some flyers about the event at the table in the front. Finally, the speech of one of our distinguished speakers, who also happened to be here, was taped by Roland Volber, who is also here, and that has won, is nominated for an award.
So you have to vote.
And you people have to vote. Roland Volber produced a video for Windham World Affairs Council from our event on November 17. The speaker, who is also here, Professor Jim Friedman, the topic was why China is rebuilding the Silk Road. It was the most interesting discussion, and I hope with your vote we will win the...
You did mention that the voting link is on our website and also on our Facebook page. If you would like to vote for Roland's video, it's up against some others, and you can vote by using the link on our website or on our Facebook page.
With this long and boring introduction, permit me to introduce our speaker tonight. Here she is. Good evening and welcome.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for being here on a Friday night. So to listen to this presentation, I'm very happy and I feel very honored to be here, especially I didn't expect it to meet to so many people here that knows about Chile and in some way they are related to Chile. So that makes me really, really happy. So. Well, and thank you for the introduction. I'm Patricia. I'm Patricia Perez. I'm from Chile. I live in Chile, in Santiago, and I look very young, but I'm not that young. I actually was born during the dictatorship. I don't remember too much things because I was very little, but I was born during the dictatorship, and I have been working for the last 9 years now at the Museum of Memory and Human Rights in Chile, which is a very new museum. It has 9 years, actually. But it's a museum that it's part of the reparation politics that the state of Chile had made to, in some way, repair or reconciliate to the Chilean society after this regime. So, well, I'm definitely going to take a part of this presentation to talk to you about the dictatorship, to really know or in some way know what happened actually, so you can then understand some of the process of transition to democracy that we had until now, that we are living today actually. And then why the museum was born, and of course some of the challenges that we still have as a society and as an educational institution or a museum. So, well, first of all, although I'm going to talk to you about the case of Chile, this of course that you can think in the things that are happening today on the world and that has happened on the past, and especially in Latin America. Here, the first thing that I have is this map of Latin America, but especially these other countries that during the 70s and the 80s were also under the same regimes. So, although I'm going to talk about the case of Chile, Chile wasn't the only dictatorship at that time. There was at least 8 countries that you can see here with the same kinds of regimes that you can understand maybe in the context of the Cold War, of course. So on the 50s, 70s, in Latin America, we had so many socialist revolutions, of course influenced by the Cuban Revolution, that will explain you then later why we have so many military interventions in all of these countries. So that's very important to say and to have in mind, because although I'm going to talk to you about the armed forces in Chile, these will be different regimes, military regimes and interventions in all of these countries to get rid of these socialist revolutions, and backed by the United States in the context of the Cold War. So that it's very important to have in mind, although I'm going to show you this case today. This is another map, but it's specifically from Chile. And I wanted to show you this because the shape of the map of the country, it's very particular too. It's this long and very thin piece of earth that you can see here. Santiago, it's right in the middle of the country, next to Argentina, Peru, and Bolivia. And we have a coast all through across the country. So this is very important also to understand some processes that took place then during the dictatorship, communication, for example, and things that happened. And ways of violence also that were used at that time. So that's also very important. Well, the Museum of Memory and Human Rights is in Santiago. It's right in the middle of the country. So as I was talking before, we have all of these socialist revolutions on these different countries, influenced, of course, by the Cuban Revolution, but we have this case in particular in Chile of Salvador Allende. He was from the Socialist Party and he was democratically elected on 1970. And this factor is very important because although he was influenced by the Cuban Revolution, this is another revolution but in a democratic way. So that was very important also to have in mind because this will be very dangerous in this context of the Cold War. So when he was elected, immediately you will see in Chile a lot of different interventions to get rid of this government. And the one that was very successful, actually, was the military coup that took place on the presidential palace on September 11 of 1973. So that's why this government lasted from 1970 to 1973. So in Chile, we also commemorate September 11, as you, here in the United States, but one that happened 45 years ago. So this picture that you can see here is, well, this building is the presidential palace called La Moneda. This was on a Tuesday morning, very early in the morning, so Salvador Allende with a group of people from his government, relatives also, part of the family, and people very close to him were inside of the government palace and they were overthrown by the armed forces of Chile. So the picture that you're looking at right now, it's the bombing attack that took place on the building. It was attacked during all day. This happened at noon, but during all day from the very early in the morning was attacked, the building, other buildings around La Moneda and other places in Santiago too, and other cities also, like Valparaíso, very close to Santiago. And then, well, finally, Salvador Allende dies inside of the building. The official versions of the government right now, of the Chilean government, said that he committed suicide inside of La Moneda a few hours after this bombing attack. Although that's something that is still in discussion until today in Chile. But he dies inside of the government palace, and this is how this dictatorship was imposed. So from this day on, from September 11 of 1973 until March 10 of 1990, we will have this regime, these 17 years of military dictatorship, with a leader, a dictator, that will be Augusto Pinochet. So these pictures that you're looking at right now are from the dictator. He was named Commandant-in-Chief of the army, of the Chilean army, like 1 or 2 months before the military coup. And he will be the leader of the coup, and then during all of the dictatorship. He will be in the spot of President of Chile and dictator during the 17 years. So of course, he's not alone in this. He's not the only responsible, of course. And there's different institutions, actually. So for example, this picture is from the Junta Militar. Junta Militar is the name of the government at that time. This is only this group of people. It's 4 people that are representing like the different institutions inside of the armed forces of Chile. So you have the army, the air force, the navy, and the police force. These 4 institutions, with the collaboration of an important amount of civils that will work with them through different institutions and backed by international organizations like, for example, the CIA. So this Junta Militar took the control of the country during the 17 years, and immediately the first days of the regime, of the dictatorship, they control everything. So they close the National Congress, for example. They create so many different law decrees. More than 3,600 new law decrees were created on the first 3 months of the dictatorship. They create different institutions. They control the mass medias. All of the information that you can see everywhere is controlled by this group of people. And of course, the persecution over the opposition. Any ways or any kind of opposition will be persecuted. So, for example, these 2 pictures that we have here are from that one, the first one, is from the same day of the military coup. This another picture took place like a few days after. But these are the kind of images that you will see like every day, especially on the big cities of Chile, like Santiago and a few others. But all across the country, you will see the same situations going on. So raids everywhere, on buildings, houses, institutions. Of course, there's persecution against the opponents, like, for example, people from Socialist Party, Communist Party, anything from left wing will be persecuted. And as I told you before, and this will be very important for the regime, the creation of these two institutions, law enforcement agencies, like the Intelligence Service of Chile, that were called the DINA and the CNA, that at the end will be the same thing, and they will work. They were leading most of the persecutions operations. So, for example, the tortures, some of the disappearance, persecutions, kidnaps, for example, were in hands of these 2 agencies. So, at the same time that this government were creating these institutions and these law decrees and controlling everything that is going on, there are systematic human rights violations that took place through all of the regime and all of the country. So also this picture is from the same day of the military coup. These are some people that were inside of the government palace. Some of them were killed in that same place, executed. The first people that were executed, and some others were taken in prison to different, and then related to different torture centers across the country. So today, the Chilean government recognized officially more than 3,200 of cases of people that were made disappear and executed during the 17 years of the dictatorship. More than 38,000 of people that survived to the torture, political imprisonment and torture. More than 500,000 of people that went to exile, forced by the dictatorship, of course, and too many other cases of children. At least, for example, more than 2,000 of cases of children that survived to the political imprisonment and torture. So I wanted to show you this just to give you an idea of the ways of violence that they used from the state through these different institutions. But I want to be very emphatic, I think you can say, yes. These numbers are the ones that are officially recognized by the government of Chile. So this is very important. This doesn't mean that this is the only amount of victims. There are so many victims that are still not recognized by the Chilean government, so this is the minimum of victims that we are talking about. And also there's so many other victims that are not recognized here in these like categories, you can say. For example, I didn't live the dictatorship. I was born, but I was very little. And I remember about the democracy. I don't remember living in a dictatorship. But I still consider myself, in a way, a victim because my family lived through the dictatorship. My family was very affected for it. But I also today live in a country that was shaped by the dictatorship. We have so many legacies of the dictatorship today. So you can say, for example, and I can consider myself also a victim of the dictatorship, but I'm not considered here. So I wanted to be emphatic with this because we usually recognize some victims, but the repercussions of a regime like this will lead so many other victims too, in different generations also. So the other thing that I wanted to show you about these numbers of victims is that if you compare the case of Chile, the numbers of victims, with other dictatorships that were happening at the same time in Latin America, you can see that the amount of people that were made disappear and executed, it's smaller than other dictatorships. For example, the dictatorship in Argentina made disappear to more than 40,000 of people. And this is a number that is recognized by the Argentinian government today. In the case of Chile, it's smaller, the number, it's 3,200 of them. The rest of them are not recognized, but also because the focus of this dictatorship will be the exile and the torture. So you can see that there's more than 38,000 of people that survived to the political imprisonment and torture, and that's because that's a focus of this dictatorship. It's not only to kill them and to make disappear the opposition, it's also to say to them that they have to be afraid, they cannot say anything against the government, they cannot be from opposition, they cannot make any critique to the regime, because this is what is going to happen. So there's more than 1,000, these are of course the ones that are recognized, officially recognized by the government today, more than 1,000 of torture centers all across the country. So there are some cities that will have more because they're bigger, like Santiago, for example, Valparaíso, but you can see that all across the country you will have more than 1,000 of the same places. The majority of them working in a clandestine way. So this was also important for the regime or for the relatives at that time because they don't know where these people are. For the relatives, for the society, these people disappear. They don't know, maybe they are in detention in one of these places, but they don't know where they are. So they were, so many of them didn't survive to these places and they were made disappear, but some others were released then. This is one example of one of these places that was used like that. This is a national stadium. This is also located in Santiago. It's one of the biggest stadiums that we have until now in Chile. It's the biggest one that we have. This is a very important soccer stadium. We are very fond of soccer in Latin America and in Chile and Argentina too. So this place is a place that we usually go there to watch football games. And at the dictatorship, during the dictatorship, was the first torture center, massive torture center. It was the principal one, the main one. So more than 12,000 of prisoners were inside of the National Stadium, were tortured. Women's, men's, people from other countries too. That it's also very important to say. The victims of the dictatorship are not only Chileans. There was so many people from Brazil, Argentina, Spain, for example, that were in Chile, and they were also victims of the dictatorship. So this place worked as a torture center for 3 months, officially. And it was the biggest one, but not the only one. As I showed you before, more than 1,000 all across the country will work on the same way that this one. Also, and this is the reason, of course, of why I wanted to show you in first place the map of Latin America. As Chile is not the only dictatorship going on, and there's also Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, for example. The intelligence service of Chile had the great idea to create a collaboration, a network of collaboration between all of the intelligence service of the countries that were at that time under the same kind of regimes. This operation was called the Condor Operation. This condor, this bird that you can see here, that is actually in the shield of Chile. This is like the official shield that we have. Shield? It's, yeah. Thank you. So it's called the Condor Operation in memory of the country that had the idea to make this network. This operation was established to get rid of the opposition in all of the region, in all of Latin America. So at least they were working 9 countries in this collaboration of violence against any opposition to the regime. So at least 70,000 people were killed only through this specific operation, all across Latin America. So that's why you will hear about so many Chileans that were killed under the Argentinian regime, or people from Brazil killed in Chile, Uruguay killed in Argentina. They were collaborating between them to make all of these violence operations. Actually, in all of the world. For example, being in exile doesn't mean that you are safe of the regime, because there was a very big network going on, so you can be persecuted although you were, for example, in Europe. There's some, here in the United States was killed a very important politician from Salvador Allende's government in Washington, D.C., Orlando Letelier, for example, in hands of the DINA and the CIA. Although there is an important collaboration between these countries that were under the same regimes, you will see that the Chilean, what was going on in Chile at that time received a lot of international help and solidarity. So there was a very big movement of international solidarity and condemnation to the regime going on from the beginning of the dictatorship, the 70s. You will see that, well, this is a consequence of the same policy of the regime. There were so many people going to exile. They were helped by these countries that they organized in exile. So they created movements, they were supported by these different governments also. There's more than 90 countries that signed an official letter of condemnation through the United Nations to condemn the regime and to support the victims. So this was very important, and this is also one of the reasons of why the dictatorship ended, the international pressure to the regime and to Augusto Pinochet. So this will be very important. And these are only examples of how the international community was showing this support to the victims. You can see that all of these posters, these were like very big posters that were used to make like massive events, like in the international community, and these were the ones that they used to as a publicity advertisement. And they used these same posters to show this solidarity with the victims. And that's why they are all in different languages, in English, in French, because they were made in the international community. So this international community and the condemnation was also going on at the same time with a very important organization and resistance of the same people that was living in Chile at that time. So, and this is also very important to say that at that time was very violent, and it was very dangerous to, for example, in the public space, say something against the dictatorship or to say that you were supporting Salvador Allende's government. That was very difficult and dangerous to do. But although it was very violent and the people was very afraid, they organized in movements and institutions to demand truth and justice for what's going on. First of all, they want to know where are they? Where is these people? As I said before, they were disappeared for the society. They were in detention, the majority of them, but they didn't know their relatives. So you can see them here with this poster with the question, where are they? And the pictures of each one of them. So there was a very big movement of trying to demand truth and justice. What's very interesting also to see is that you can see in the majority of the pictures here too, that the people that it's on the pictures are women, most of them women. Because yes, they were the mothers. It is still, but at that time was very much a machista society. So the women weren't considered as dangerous as men to be persecuted because they are in home taking care of their children. That's the thinking of the regime in some way. And there's men participating in politics, in political parties, so they were persecuted. So the mothers and wives of all of these people that was actually disappeared or in detention, for example, or exile, organized themselves to fight and resist the dictatorship. That's why you will see so many women like fighting for freedom and asking for truth and justice. For example, this picture here, this one, this is, the ones that have been in Chile or know something about Chile, the national dance that we have, the Cueca, it's a dance between a man and a woman. It was signed as our national dance during the dictatorship by Augusto Pinochet. And the role of the men on the Cueca, it's very important. So this group of women were dancing the Cueca as a way of show or to ask for truth and justice. They were dancing this Cueca on the public space, but alone, dressed like this, as you can see there. So it was a very powerful symbolic demonstration that was made by this group of women. They are still dancing this Cueca alone in Chile. Of course, the majority of the women that dance this Cueca are daughters or granddaughters of these victims, because as you can see on the picture, so many of them has passed away. Passed away with the years. So today are other generations demanding truth and justice. Now, as I told you before, it was very violent. Here, it doesn't matter that you are women of 80 years old. On the streets, they will hit you, they will detain you on the same way that the rest of the population, and as they used to do during the dictatorship. So there was massive detentions, executions, and violent cases during especially the 80s. Against all of the people that were trying to make demonstrations against the dictatorship. So here you have some pictures about it. This case, for example, it's a very well-known case in Chile. It's a very violent case also. These two young university students, like 19 years old, were burned by a group of military and police force on the streets because they were participating in a demonstration. He was photographer. So the crime that he committed, and that's the reason of why they were detained, is because he was with his camera taking pictures of the violence that was going on that demonstration. So they were detained and burned on the street. He died like 4 days after that, and she survived. She's still alive. She survived with more than the 60% of her body all burned. She lives in Canada. He was exiled here in the United States. He went to Washington, D.C. He flew to Chile to take pictures of all of these demonstrations that were going on in the 80s, and he was killed like 1 month after arriving to Chile. I think his mother is still living here in the United States because he was in exile with a big part of his family. So, finally, I wanted to show you this. This is a very particular way to end a regime like this. The dictatorship ended on 1990, but through a democratic referendum or voting process that was made on 1988. So this is very particular because it was a very violent dictatorship. They were in power and they were not going to leave this spot. But when they made the constitution, the national constitution on 1980, they said, and they were committed to make a referendum on 1988 to know if they will continue on power or no. So what changed here is that the international community was so organized and they had so much condemnation to the regime and pressure to the regime, and in Chile also people were so organized, that they forced Pinochet to make this referendum in a democratic way. So there's elections, they have to open again the electoral registers because the regime had burned them, so they have to do everything from zero, and these are the two options to vote on these elections. So you have yes, Pinochet, which means I do approve or support this dictatorship for 8 more years, and no, Chile, the joy is coming. We don't want dictatorship anymore. So the referendum, was made in October of 1988, and the option winning here in the end is the option of no. We don't want dictatorship anymore. So this is how the dictatorship ended. Now, it's not that simple. As you can see here with this picture, it wasn't that simple, that easy. And also you can see that it's not too much difference between the two options. There was a lot of support for the dictatorship that you can explain for many reasons. So many people didn't know about the human rights violation that was going on, although it's very unbelievable to say, but you have seen the shape of Chile. The communication was very difficult. There's some cities where you can see this violence in a very explicit way, but there's some other places where you never see this happening. And the mass medias were under the absolute control of the regime, so you never see this on the official national television, for example. So there was actually a lot of people that didn't know about it. There's still a lot of people that doesn't believe that this happened. So there was a lot of support for the regime, and also a lot of people that supported the dictatorship, that they wanted that this happened, still, until now. So the difference wasn't that much. But the dictatorship ended. They had to give the control to another government. They were committed to do that because there was international watchers and a lot of international pressure. But that happened in 1988, and the dictatorship ended in 1990 because we have like more than 1 year of transition. So we have to make elections. There has to be candidates to be the next democratic government. We have 3 candidates. 2 of them were collaborators of the dictatorship, and one of them is He's Patricia Allende from the Christian Democratic Party. He was elected on these democratic elections in 1989. So he will be the next democratic government. But he assumed his government on March 10 on 1990. So that's why we said that officially the dictatorship ended on 1990. So here they come to this period of transition to democracy that I said that we are still on this process because, well, I believe that there's some things that a society needs to achieve to really say that we are back in democracy and to, I don't know, to pass through this process of reconciliation maybe that so many countries want to achieve after a regime like this. So in Chile, you can consider in general, and this is how it's considered in the academia and so many fields, Chile and Argentina are two countries that have made a very well job in the process of transitional justice, of preserving memory, to judge the criminals, and to do some things to repair to the society. Chile and Argentina are countries that have made a lot of things. And yes, certainly in Chile we have made a lot of things, but it's not easy. And it has a lot of complexities behind it that I would like to, or maybe I'll tell you some things about it. So one of the first important things that were made is that immediately after the dictatorship ended on 1990 with the next democratic government, was created the National Commission for Peace and Reconciliation. This is an investigation that was made by the government to know the truth about the cases of people that were made disappear and executed during the dictatorship. This is when they recognized more than 3,200 people, which are the official numbers recognized by the government. This happened in 1990, so you can understand and imagine that it was in a very difficult context. Well, you know that because you were in Chile at that time, but Augusto Pinochet actually, well, it ended. He's not the dictator anymore. We don't have dictatorship anymore, but he was still on the government. And he stayed in that spot for a lot of years. So, and Augusto Pinochet, but a lot of other people. So the dictatorship ended officially, but they will continue working on the government. So there was a lot of denial to the things that are happening. Patricia Perez, this president, he asked officially for apologies to the Chileans and to the victims, but he wasn't the one that committed the crimes. So we still have institutions that were the ones involved in all of the human rights violations that are not recognizing that they actually committed human rights violations. So that's very complicated because we have investigations and official recognition by the state of Chile, but not from the institutions that actually committed the crimes. So that's very complicated. Then, a few years later, in 2003, another commission was created, the National Commission for Political Imprisonment and Torture. This was very important because the majority of the victims suffered torture, and they were survivors. So they seek for the truth of all of the people's survival to the political imprisonment and torture. Here's when they recognize more than 38,000 of people. So as you can see here, there is sort of an official recognition of what happened by the state of Chile. We have the names of the people, of the perpetrators, for example, but these investigations are not judicial institutions. So that we have these investigations doesn't mean that we have to judge all of these people that committed the crimes. So we have the names, but they are not judged. So this is, well, a big part of the transitional justice that we call, which is this process of achieve this reconciliation, to know the truth, to make justice about the crimes that were committed, has been done in Chile, but in a very complicated way. But there's another part of this process of transitional justice that I personally believe that it's one of the most important ones, of course, with the criminal justice, which is the symbolic reparation, which is memory and education. And that's actually the field that I've been working on for the last 9 years through the Museum of Memory and Human Rights. So before showing you some examples of that, I wanted to have this quote here because I think it's the reason of why we work in memory, why we remember these things that are very horrible and difficult to remember as a society. Well, those who do not know history are condemned to repeat it. To achieve this reconciliation, this justice, and the return of the democracy, we have to learn about what happened, because if we don't, they're so easy that this could happen again. So the memory and the preservation of memory has been a very important process that took place in Chile. And this is something that has made a very big difference between the process of recognize the perpetrators and creating the truth commissions, but it's also to remember what happened in the same places with the community, to remember to the community. So, for example, in Chile, we have now more than 200 of memorials. The construction of memorials is so important to a society, and in Chile we have so many of them. This one, for example, this picture is from the first memorial that was built in Chile. This is in the General Cemetery. It's the memorial for the disappeared and executed. Well, you cannot see it very well from this picture, but it's this huge wall with all of the names recognized on the truth commissions as disappeared and executed. This other picture is from the same place. This is another place inside of the cemetery, which has all of these crosses. It has more than 100 of them, because this was one of the mass graves that were discovered in the 90s. So many bodies of people that were killed in Santiago specifically, the majority of them on the first days of the dictatorship on the streets, like massive executions, were lived here in these mass graves that were at that time. The same workers of the cemetery at that time put these crosses with the dates. The majority of them had 1973 and no names. And you can see all of this space, all with these same crosses. The majority of these victims are not identified until now. They are still disappeared, and we don't know where who they were. This Park for Peace Villa Grimaldi, this is another memorial that we have. This was, during the dictatorship, like an operation center of the DINA, of the intelligence service. So many people were tortured here, especially women. Actually, one of them is the former president of Chile, Michelle Bachelet. She was in prison in there, she was tortured. And it was one of the most important operation centers of the DINA. So they didn't use this place only for torture, also to control the majority of the detention centers in Chile too. So it was very important. This was destroyed by the same dictatorship, the buildings, the spaces that they used. But then this place was recovered by human rights organizations and groups of families of the victims, and they built this memorial on the same place. So that's very important to say too, because this construction of these more than 200 memorials that we have in Chile are actually initiatives of human rights organizations and relatives of victims. The state of Chile has been involved in the creation of the first one, of this one. They use money of the government and they support the creation of it, but the majority of the rest of the memorials are only initiative and work of the human rights organizations. So they are built with their own money, and they work in the place to develop relationships with the community. So it's a very important job that they do. This is the Memorial of Women in Memory, for example, made to commemorate all of the women disappeared and executed. 3 chairs very close to the airport of Santiago. This was made in a place where 3 teachers were found decapitated on the 80s. They were kidnapped outside of a school in Santiago, and then they appeared decapitated a few days after in this same place. And the families of them made this memorial. They were persecuted because they were professors, they were teachers. There's some careers that were very dangerous at that time. And being a teacher, history teacher, for example, was a very dangerous profession. So this is an example of that. This is the National Stadium today. I wanted to show you this because this is a very powerful memorial. It's not a monument like the other ones that I show you, like, for example, Villa Grimaldi, this Park for Peace. It's like a museum. It's a very, very big place. But this one, it's very small but very powerful. This is inside of the National Stadium. You can see that, well, all of the seats are red. So if you go to the National Stadium and you see everything, you can see all red, all of the seats. But then in the middle, you have this place, which the seats that you can see here are the same ones as it was during the dictatorship, are like wood tables, just that, with this message. A country without memory, it's a country without future. And this is very powerful because, as I told you before, this is the main stadium that we have until today. Every time that you go there to see a football game, to watch a concert, for example, or anything, any activity, you can see this. So it's a constant reminder to all of the people that go to the National Stadium for entertainment that they can see this. Well, another detention center, that this is a street in Santiago, in the middle of Santiago. You can see on the floor all of these things with the names and ages of the victims. For example, he was 16 years old. The average of the victims are very young, between 16 and 25 years old. They were very young. But there's other ways of preserving memory. When we have like a hero in our history, we put their names in the history books, we put their names in the streets, for example, on squares and everything, and this also happened with the memory, with regimes like this and human rights violations. That 2 pictures are from a street, a very important avenue that we have in Santiago that during the dictatorship was called September 11. Because it was to commemorate the day that Chile was saved by this Marxist chaos. That was the reason. Now in democracy, we could change the name of this street, of this avenue, to the original name that it has, New Providence. And that's how it's called today. So it's no longer a street that it's commemorating the military coup. We also celebrate or commemorate in Chile, and I'm pretty sure that now this is an international commemoration, the National Day of the Missing Detained. Every August 30, we commemorate the disappearance as a policy of violence around the world. And that's a very important commemoration that we have in Chile too. And something that made a very big difference on this process of justice and preservation of memory was the construction of the Museum of Memory and Human Rights. This museum was inaugurated in 2010. It's a very new museum, it only has 9 years. And it's part of the reparation politics that has been used or applied by the government of Chile. So something very important to say about the museum is that it works with 97% of its budget. It's a budget of the state of Chile. So immediately when the state gets involved in the construction of a place like this, it's an implicit statement of recognition to what happened. So that we have this Museum of Memory and Human Rights working with money of the government, it's a way to say that the government of Chile recognized what actually happened. So the Museum of Memory and Human Rights was made to show to the society what happened. The first thing that the society needs to know is what happened. They didn't know. They didn't have any information about it. They haven't seen any pictures, anything about what happened. And the construction of the Museum of Memory and Human Rights will be the first time in Chile that you can see that the people have public access to the documents and to things that really happened at the dictatorship. So we have a very important collection of documents. Here I have some of the numbers that I will not try to say in English. But we have so many documents, photographs, audiovisual documents, for example, objects, arpilleras that we were talking before. All of this collection was or is in the museum right now because these were objects and documents that were saved by people during the dictatorship. They were hiding documents on the backyard, literally making holes on the earth, on the backyard, to hide these documents because they were burned for the regime, so they were trying to save them, and human rights organizations. For example, something that I didn't told you, but on this case it will be very important, it's the role of the church in Chile. The church was an institution that in general, they defend the human rights. They create organizations to try to help the victims. And they had a very important role on the preservation of documents, and judicial documents too, that are very important until now in Chile for the judicial processes that we have, for example. So we have so many documents that we have all of this collection on disposition to anyone that wants to see them. So we have inside of the museum too, like documentary centers, you can say, for investigation, for research. So you can have access to all of these documents, to photographs, to audiovisual documents, to everything that we have, you can have access to them. If you want to, through the website, actually, of the museum, you can have access to them also. So it's a very big museum. It's, you cannot see it too much on the pictures, but it's a very big building. We have at least 5 floors with expositions, with exhibitions about the 17 years of the dictatorship and also other topics or other subjects about human rights. And this is one of that's the building where is the main collection, and this is one of the entrances. You can see that, when you walk to inside of the museum, you can see all of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights through one of the walls of the entrance of the museum. Here I have some pictures of what it looks from inside. This is part of the collection. As I told you, it's a very big collection. I have seen people there for weeks trying to see all of the documents that we have. I have been working for 9 years and I don't know all of the collection that we have. It's impressive how big it is. And it's a very interactive collection too. And this is very important because it's not dedicated only to the victims and only to the relatives of the victims. It's also to new generations that didn't live the dictatorship. So we have to talk about the dictatorship, of course, and the human rights violations that happened there. But also we have to talk, and we need to talk about human rights violations that are going on today on democracy, not only in Chile. So you will see expositions from around the world trying to open spaces of dialogue about the human rights and memory, but not only about the dictatorship of Chile. So we also use art as a way to talk about these subjects. Art opens a whole universe that you can talk about these things in another way. So we have a lot of arts expositions. This is one intervention of Alfredo Yar. Alfredo Yar is an audiovisual artist, Chilean, but that lives here in the United States, and he makes this intervention Geometry of Consciousness. He's, well, just something funny to say to you. He's Sting, the ex-singer of The Police, this band. He's very important for Chile. He actually made a song in memory of this group of women that dance this Cueca alone. He's very loved in Chile, and he visited the museum last year. So this picture was taken there. This is another artwork that we have, very important for us. Maybe you can recognize it, but this wall, which is a very big wall, on another entrance of the museum, this is the last song or poem that Victor Jara wrote inside of the Chilean stadium when he was detained. Brutally tortured before being killed, he wrote this song. And this is an artwork that made Jorge Tacla, another Chilean artist that lives here in the United States. And he made this artwork called At the Same Time in the Same Place, in memory of Victor Jara. We have another exposition. This is not the only one. We have so many of them. But this is an example of how we open spaces of dialogue about other subjects and issues, which is, for example, what's going on with indigenous communities in Chile today, that so many human rights violations have been committed against them by the state of Chile, and we made an exposition to talk about these issues today. So, as you can see, it's principle about the dictatorship, but we try to open spaces to other issues too. And we made massive events. So anyone can go to the museum and use the museum to make different activities to preserve memory. As you can see, theater and cinema, you were there? Oh, that's so great. Massive concerts. So there's thousands of people that you will see almost every day at the museum. This is one of the most visited museums in Chile. Between 300 and 600 people goes every day to see it. This is a very special part inside of the building. This is it's like having a small memorial inside of all of the building. This is, again, you cannot see it too well on this picture, but it's a huge wall with all of these pictures in memory of the people that were made disappear and executed. Now, maybe you can see it better from here, but not all of the frames have pictures. So many of them are in black or white, and that's very important. As we were talking before, these are not the only victims. They are not all of them recognized by the government, so they're not here. And also, it's very common to find people that doesn't have pictures. At that time in Chile, the technology was very expensive, like having cameras in your house to take pictures of your family was very expensive. And you don't have technology in all of the country. In Santiago, you will find that, but not all of the country. So there's so many people that doesn't have pictures. And also this, like down here, you can see this like candles light up. That's so important. The most used way of commemoration to the disappearance especially, it's light candles in memory of them. So outside of the National Stadium, near to La Moneda, for example, outside on the street, outside of the museum, you will see people all the time lighting candles in memory of them. So this space, it's very important for us. First of all, because it's a way of recognition, and that's something very important as a way of reparation, because through years and until now, you will hear people from the government to say that this didn't happen. So if we think in a way of reparation that someone can make, is first of all the recognition. So maybe you don't have a picture of your relative, but you have a space here and you're recognized. And that's something very important. And another reason of why this is so important for us is because they are disappeared. And the disappearance, it's so violent. If you don't know what happened with your relative, if you don't see his body for example, you don't have a closure, first of all. You don't have any physical place to go to commemorate him. For example, on their birthday, like if you want to put a flower in memory of them, you don't have a space. So many of people go to the museum. So you will see that it's a museum, but it's also at the same time a memorial. So it's very powerful. And also the museum is a school. Here we have this phrase that says the museum is a school. Another entrance of the museum, a big wall that you can read this, because of course the most important goal that we have is education, is to learn about this so it can never happen again. So we need to teach about human rights. We need to teach about what happened during the dictatorship so we can prevent that. And that's the main goal that we have as an institution. So as you can see, well, I don't have the time now to tell you all of the activities that we do with students especially, but here you have some idea, I think, of the majority of the people that visit the museum are students. So we have to do activities with them so they can, to create critical thinking, which I think it's the only way to prevent these crimes to be committed again. And I want to end this presentation with this question here. This is a campaign that we have developed at the museum for the past months, on the social medias especially, which it says, what happens if I forget, with this hashtag. So we have an activity at the museum going on right now and we have a space that people can write down on a big wall their reflections about what happens if I forget. And this is a social media campaign. We have been encouraging people for the past year, I think, almost a year, to think what can happen if we forget about these things. So this is a very positive campaign we have seen for the past months. This was think for a specific commemoration, but we have been doing this campaign for months now because it has been very positive, the response of younger generations especially. So I just wanted to end this presentation with this question because I think this is what we need to do, like to think what can happen as a society with us if we forget about our history, and how easy it is to repeat these things again. Maybe not in the same way, but there is so much violence going on today. There is so much human rights violations, and we need to do something we need to do things in another way. And first of all, we have to talk about these issues. So, well, okay, I'm gonna end this presentation right now. Thank you.
So, if you have questions, please raise your hand, and here somebody is going to be helping you.
Oh, she has.
What concerns me is in mainstream media in our country, there's little discussion on how our own government has a history of financing these regimes and dictatorships. And I noticed in one of the little plaques there, the bird had the CIA written on its neck, but I'm curious, I mean, I would like to see a lot more mainstream information where people, even on public radio, to mention, by the way, this is financed by our government. And I think that the public really, they're becoming more aware, but I think it needs to become even more wide range. Thank you.
Well, I have to say that I'm completely agree with you. I think that first of all, the mass medias are such a powerful instrument. You can control an entire society through mass medias. So if we don't see these things right now on the national television or radio or any other platform, It's because they don't want us to know. And it's a reason behind that. So I think that's why at the end of the presentation, I was speaking about critical thinking. Trying to see that if we don't see this on the mass medias, it's because there's a reason behind it. Of course, we need to see this. We need to be informed. We need to be educated in these things. Maybe can sound impressive for you, but this is not talked in Chile too. The mass media doesn't talk about what happened during the dictatorship, or either that it was sponsored by the United States, for example. The people in general, they know that the United States has a very important influence in Latin America. We are a very capitalist country, for example, so people in general knows that, but they don't know details about how it was done, for example. So it happens here in the United States, but on the rest of the world too, and in Chile it's not the exception. Yeah.
I am shaking. This is very hard to talk. I was aware of what happened in Chile. I'm one of the educated people, but it didn't stop it. Just because I knew it didn't stop it. I did things to try to stop it. And I feel like that's what we did with our democracy. We've crushed other countries with our democracy. Yeah. Now we're turning into something very different. And I don't know what our country would be capable of if this thing that's happening to us in our country gets out of control. So I'm frightened for us, and I'm frightened for the world. And I really hope we can do this, like slide it back somehow or stop it. But I have doubts. I have some serious doubts. And the whole thing about fake news is so grisly. Because that's one of the first things they do is take over the media. And we've seen in Turkey someone was tortured and killed, and our president was so buffoonish. I mean, they laughed at Hitler, now we're laughing at him, and I'm frightened. Yeah. Because it's not funny. And I think what's happening is pretty frightening. Yeah. So in a funny way, we're kind of turning tables. You're in a better place than we are, I think. But hopefully, I don't know. So I just wanted to let you know that, even with the knowledge, it doesn't seem to stop sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree too. And I feel afraid also. Just as an example, I was telling about this to Therese a few weeks ago, but in Chile, I feel, most of the time, I feel afraid to say that I work at the Museum of Memory and Human Rights. Usually when people ask me, or when I take a taxi, I said that I am a photographer or anything else, but I don't say that I work on human rights, because it is dangerous in some ways. Latin America is going through a very difficult process right now. I don't know if you have heard, but there was elections last week in Brazil. The possible next president, it's a very fascist. Yeah. In Chile right now, the government that we have is extreme right-wing. And we have an extreme right-wing movement going on, supporting these elections in Brazil. What's going on in Argentina? Extreme right-wings. What's going on in the rest of Latin America? So it's very frightening what's going on. I share with you the same feelings. But I think that if I continue working on this, because it's not an easy job to work on this, to talk about this, first of all, it's not easy. If I continue working on this, it's because deeply inside, I believe that new generations have this responsibility to change things. And that's something that we need to learn in all of the spaces of our society, and stop also leading the responsibility to the institutions. Because human rights violations and violence can happen from one person to another, and not only from the government to their civilians. And if we start valuing life and the respect of the human rights between us, I think that can make a difference at the end. And I know that that's very difficult, and we constantly lose our hope that this can work, but I think that these empires have nothing without people. That's why they control the mass media, because they need the support of the people. And if we people don't support these things and we value the human rights and life more than power and more than money, because at the end I think this is only about power and money, I think we can make a difference. So I know I share the same feelings that you, but I do have hope at the end.
Hi, I was curious about how the Chilean people remember Allende's government and what the memory of socialist Chile is for people today.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, because it's today Chilean society is very divided. You will see until now so many people that support the dictatorship, that supports these human rights violations, and so many others that doesn't. But one reason of why we have so many different memories about Salvador Allende's government and the dictatorship, one of them is because the main way that the US government was trying to take over Salvador Allende's government was through the mass media. So they were paying for the main journals, for example, to create a socialist crisis, social crisis during Salvador Allende's government. So, for example, they were controlling the economy. They got to the country to a place where a lot of people didn't want Salvador Allende's government. Although he made a lot of reforms and the country was very, very good, they create a very big social crisis. So you will hear so many people until now truly believing that that government was very bad for people. So the experiences are very different. And mainly you will hear people that was very poor, for example, at that time, that has a very good impression for Salvador Allende's government, because the main revolution that he made is to give power to the people. So they had a very good impression, but people that had money, for example, didn't have a good impression. And so it's very divided until now on the impressions of Salvador Allende's government and also the dictatorship. Yeah, it's very divided.
I was just wondering if there were any warning signs on the rise of authoritarianism in Chile, or if it was very sudden, like you mentioned the explosion, or if there was anything leading up to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand very well the question. I'm sorry.
Sure. If there were any warning signs about the rise of authoritarianism in Chile before the explosion on September 11th?
Yes. There was actually the military coup wasn't the first time that they tried to overthrow Salvador Allende's government. Actually, that same year, we had another instance of military coup that wasn't successful. So we do had different, for example, on 1970, important figure of the military force was killed by the CIA. Because he was one of the first oppositions that the military had to overthrow the government of Salvador Allende. Then, a few years later, the commandant-in-chief of the army was killed also, another one, because he was an opposition or an obstacle to the intervention of the military forces on the government. So there was a lot of signs of that something will happen. Salvador Allende knew that something was going to happen. Actually, he called for a referendum the same day that the military coup was made. I mean, he called it before, but the day of the coup, he was going to make a referendum, a public referendum, so people can ask or people can decide if he will continue or no, because he knew that something will happen then. But why this happened like this? Because he was very, I don't want to say stubborn, but he never wanted to make this revolution, socialist revolution, in other way that wasn't democratic. So he stayed in that place. But yeah, there was so many signs that something like this would happen. Nobody knew that it would be so many years and so violent as it was, but they knew that the intervention will come. And the people, so many people ask for it too. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and speaking with us tonight. I was wondering what the activities were of the people who were murdered or disappeared, what it was that they were trying, the government was quelling by disappearing them or murdering them. And was there like in the beginning that there was a lot, or did it sort of continue all the way through?
Yeah.
And were people continuing those activities even though they still saw their country people murdered?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question. For one side, well, the persecution, for example, most of the executions, disappearance, and detentions took place on the beginning of the dictatorship. And they were very massive and very undiscriminated. Anyone can be detained or executed because the decision of executing somebody, of detaining somebody, was from this military that was on the street at that time. So if in some way he can think that you are from opposition, you will be detained or you will be executed. And that happened at least on the first months and 3 years of the dictatorship. So what you needed to do, or what's the reason of why they were persecuted? First of all, you have to be participating in a movement or political party from opposition, from left wing. So if you were participating in the Socialist Party or the Communist Party, you will be persecuted. If you were participating in unions, for example, if you were a worker and in your job you were part of the union, maybe you will be persecuted. If you were the part of the church that was supporting Salvador Allende's government, you will be persecuted. If you lived in certain places of Chile, you will be persecuted. If you were a farmer, for example. If you were studying in certain universities, the university where Victor Jara was detained, a lot of students were detained there. A lot of teachers were detained there because the majority of the people that goes there, not all of them, but that institution has a certain ideology, you can say. So they suppose that everyone that goes to this university will be from left wing, so they will detain them. There's so many reasons of why you will be persecuted. If your family had money, for example, or you had a relative that were from the military or the Navy or the Air Force, maybe you will not be persecuted. So it was very undiscriminated, and you didn't need to have so many reasons to be detained. It only takes that you were participating in a movement, or you look like someone from opposition. If you are dressed in a certain way, they can think that you are from opposition. So it was very undiscriminated. But then, on the 80s, the persecution was very specific. Like from the movements that they wanted to exterminate, the politicians that they wanted to exterminate. So during the 80s, the persecution was very specific, and they wanted to detain and make disappear to specific persons. So that's why in the beginning was like very massive and took place the majority of the violence. The 80s was very violent too, but the specific persecution was on the 80s. Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. I believe Rosario, you wanted to ask? Okay.
Yeah, right here.
You can absolutely do two.
Right here.
Yeah, of course.
Putting your question together with your response, I'm wondering, given the right-wing direction of the government now, and your very personal thoughts and feelings about being hesitant or shy about expressing where you work, what is happening to the funding, if anything, of this museum, which you said was primarily funded by the government? So given the direction, what's happening in terms of funding?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting too. And this is something that was thought before building the museum for the same reasons. So yes, we have 97% of the budget. It's from the state of Chile, but we are a private foundation. So we worked independently from the government that we had at that time, which means that in a legal way, for example, the government right now cannot reduce the budget that we have, but they can control some of the programs that we have. For example, this government that we have right now is on power from March of this year, of 2018. The elections were last year in November. We were developing a very important program of education with the Ministry of Education in Chile to work in the subject of memory and human rights in the schools, in the public education. We had the program developed and everything ready to work on this year. And in March, this program was off and we don't have it anymore. So we have the money today, the same amount of money that we used to have before, but we don't have this educational program that we wanted to do. So they cannot take us away the money that we have, the amount of money that we have, but they do control some of the programs. Not all of them, but some of them. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering what was the reception of Isabel Allende's The House of Spirits in Chile? And the second question is if this sort of episode in the history of Chile is also taught in the schools, and how is it taught?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Isabel Allende is a very recognized woman, very loved in general for the Chilean society. The Houses of the Spirit, this book that she wrote, it's in the majority of the schools, like a book that you have to read, like obligation on the curriculum. So it's a very well-known and valued writer and politician. She works in politics now, in the government. And then about education, that's very sad too. We don't teach this on public schools on the proper way. When you are, I don't know which grade is that here, but when you have 15 years old, like I don't know which grade is, but that's
9th grade, 10th grade.
9th grade, yeah, well, yeah. So that's the only time you have, like, at the end of the year, you have like a small period of time when you have to teach about this, but it's in certain way. Until now, in so many schools, you cannot say dictatorship, you cannot talk about the human rights violations, maybe you can talk about the economy at that time, of the development of communication between the regions, for example. That was something that Pinochet did, and some other stuffs, but you cannot talk about human rights violations. So, and well, you can imagine what happened in private schools. It's less teach than in public schools. So it's very difficult to talk about that. And I think that's the reason of why today the majority of the people that goes to the museum are students. Because the museum is another institution where another person can talk to them about the subjects that they cannot talk about on the schools. So they take the students on a trip in the middle of the year, most of them, and they go to the museum. And that's when we can talk about that. So the teachers had no problems with the owners of the schools, for example.
Even though Michelle Bachelet was the president, it's still
Yes.
not, yeah.
Yes. It was very difficult, yeah, because Michelle Bachelet didn't have too many support to make a lot of the changes that she wanted to do, so it was very difficult for her. And until now, only now, last week, there's a senator that created a law project to make obligation the subject of memory and human rights on the schools in the history subject. But that's in process, like last week was presented officially. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Patricia.
To thank you for everything that you have taught us, your great lecture about Chile and its past. We offer you a present from Vermont to take it with you.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much.
Very well.
Well, for me too.
Okay, I hope you all drive home safely and do not stop in any bar. On the way home.
I didn't even know we were behind a camera. Or we were in front of a camera. I explained.